from working with you as the executive director at Grounded, and formerly back when I started at Grounded, my primary project was a stormwater project in the watershed. And so have been working with many of you around this issue ever since then, around 2017. And then at that point, learning about all of the work that had been done up till 2017. And so I'm really excited to see us together at this table again. John Stevens has been really integral in helping us convene you all today to take a look at the work that we've been doing, Grounded, in conjunction with the larger team that's going to be talked about today with PWSA around their strategic plan for stormwater. And so really excited to, again, we're here to honor and understand how the work all of you have already done fits into next steps and plans in the future, recognizing that, this is an iterative process until we reach solution. And, so glad that all of you have been committed every step of the way. And this is another step of that commitment. So Ellen, if you want to go from there, I'm happy to jump in whenever.
Great. Julie, I think it's you, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think since we do have quite a large group tonight, we'll do introductions in breakout groups. So anyone who's on the consultant team, there are a few of us on the call, if you could just rename yourselves with your organization, that will tell everyone who's in the room. And for anyone who's also participating from the Negley Run area, you can identify yourself however you choose to, just so that we know who's here. So just continuing with the slides and the project explanation, as you can see on the screen, there is quite a number of us who are part of the consultant team. It's being led by Penn Praxis, where myself and Ellen are, and also with AKRF, and then Grounded Strategies, which Ariam and Becca here tonight are from Grounded, and then we have a whole, and then Andrew Pogon, we have Todd and his team as well. So a lot of great minds coming together to help shape the strategic planning team. And next slide. So just a run of show for tonight. We are going to go over the progress that we've made so far as a part of the strategic plan. We're going to talk about the 4 Ps and why those are really important, and then go into the place-based nature of the plan, which Ellen will guide us through, and why we are working in your community to get through this next phase of the strategic plan. And then we'll just close with some thoughts from PWSA and let you all out of here on time. Okay, next slide. So a little bit of just where we are in the strategic plan. Next slide. So as Ariam said, we started this plan last year, but this really built on years of great work that PWSA and many of the engaged place-based partners have been doing over the past decade plus. And so you can see in the green text, this is where we started the strategic plan, but this is taking into consideration many of the work, the plans that Alcosan has done, and also some changes in permitting and some of the federal regulations. So we're trying to thread in the new information while also knowing that this is not in and of itself an end game. This is actually just a step in continuing more work and more engagement over the next several years. So the question is, well, why do we need this plan now if so many of these other past plans have taken place? And really, it's a few main factors. Green First, which was done in recent years, really focused on green infrastructure planning as kind of the main thrust, the main topic. And this plan is really looking at green and gray infrastructure. Also in the interim, Alcosan, which is the county water authority, finalized its plan for construction of tunnels, which will reduce sewage overflow and in many areas, which we'll explain shortly. And so we once again kind of wanted to determine, well, where are the priorities that PWSA can focus, knowing that those new infrastructure investments were coming online. So this expands the thinking, and it also, asks us to kind of re-strategize how that investment would take place. Here we are in the schedule of the plan. We are close to the finish. We've already done several focus groups, which many of you have participated in as well. And we, back in October, November, we also heard from other peer utilities across the country about some of the ways that they have handled issues similar to PWSA's. And so really what we've been doing over the last several months is developing some targeted recommendations, figuring out how to focus this place-based element, and also running 2 cohorts of the Community Ambassador Program, which again, Grounded Strategies has been taking the lead on that. So this is what's been going on. This is where we are, and tonight we'll talk to you about Negley Run. So Ellen, you could take it from here.
Our work so far has really zeroed in on what our team thinks are the top 6 priority actions, and our conversations with PWSA and all the work that we've been doing are structured in these 6 areas. So the first idea was it's important to analyze the priority areas of investment.
Between the Greenway and Hazel Green, so they thought they had been to the Greenway, but
second is to define the initial investment strategy and illustrate it in a few places so people can understand what that means. Third is to think about how to leverage the stormwater fee impact so that it has the biggest effect on communities in Pittsburgh. The fourth is establishing guiding principles for the level of service and flooding. We won't have within the scope of our work the ability to do all the data side of establishing those levels of service, but it's our job to think about some of the principles that inform the work that's being done by others on the data. Fifth is to develop a communication framework to increase transparency, which is something that we've heard from a lot of people as being a strong interest of communities that are really engaged in thinking about water. And sixth is to take advantage of this moment of administration change and try to develop a framework for a joint task force on stormwater that would bring together the mayor's new team from many different departments. This is a lot of work. Tonight, we thought we would just focus on updating you on what we're doing in the first and second areas. In terms of analyzing the priority areas of investment, what we've been doing is a lot of mapping around thinking about new criteria for investment that are beyond just thinking about where are good locations for green infrastructure. So I'm going to run through some of that mapping. Some of it may require some questions and answers from us, and we can always go back and we can share the maps in progress with you so that you can study them more closely. So this is trying to think about where can the city have the biggest impact. The first thing that we did was look at all of the areas where there's a lot of sewer overflow into the rivers. And this is just, the red is the highest, the lightest colors here are the lowest, and then there's also in gray the volumes of MS4, which is another water quality measure. After the tunnels are built, some of those things get a lot better. So then we thought about how do you rethink the mapping of the hot spots and areas if you think about what happens when the tunnels come in. So the map changes significantly. Some places that are really bad get much better, but you can see that there's still a lot of areas where work is needed. We looked at many different measures of environmental justice, places where you could think about making investments in water that would also be transformative and help communities move forward other agendas that they have. And ultimately, we based on our focus group meetings, we decided that maybe the Allegheny County Environmental Justice Index was the best measure. And you can see the areas that are the priority investments for environmental justice are the darker, and the areas where there's less priority are the lighter. Flooding has been an ongoing challenge to map. The data is not complete, of course, relying on the main sources that are available, and looking at things like where is there a lot of reported basement backups, where is there a lot of surface flooding, and trying to do the best job of showing places where flooding is the main factor. And then finally, just going back to things like vacant lots, major parks and greenways, and other places where green infrastructure, where there's a lot of opportunity for it. If we think of those as our 4 lenses, and this is what PWSA is thinking about, moving away from just prioritizing water quality and green infrastructure to be thinking about integrating all of these other things that investment can do in water. We've been doing a lot of work to think about how do we talk about this. So doing some modeling of the terrain of Pittsburgh, looking at our engineers at AKRF, Tom Petroni in particular, was saying, trying to show all the places where there are historical streams that are buried in the city, and that will also help people understand why flooding occurs where it does. And following on some of the citywide strategies, just thinking about the ways in which a citywide network of greenways connecting the big park areas can start to be layered into that topography to create something that has a major impact on all of these different areas that we're looking at in the 4 lenses. So when we look at all those different areas together, the 4 lenses, places where there's the most overlap are Negley Run and Sawmill Run. So these are the 2 areas, 2 sewer sheds, 2 watersheds, where we have recommended to PWSA that these become priority geographic areas for investment. It's not to say that consent decrees and other things going on, other data work being done by other teams working with PWSA won't identify additional areas for investment, but these are the ones that our work really suggests pop out. So that's a summary of what we've been doing under this first priority area of action. The second is to define an initial investment strategy and to illustrate it. So we've looked at the 5-year current capital plan. We've discussed it in focus groups with many active groups in the city. And one of the things that's really emerged from that conversation is that it would be great to concentrate investment so that more projects in a compact area would allow you to achieve a high level of performance and to really make a dent in flooding levels or in the quality of life in a neighborhood. Miriam, I'm going to turn it over to you to jump in and talk about these.
Absolutely. The 4 Ps are something that most people here will be familiar with as a framework our city's been kind of coalescing around over the past decade. And so people, performance, plan, in place, looking at how can we use those as a litmus test to measure our recommendations against that framework. And so the next couple of slides kind of pulls out some of those summary points. The people side really represented by the ambassador model, the lifting up of the task force model that many of you are very familiar with, placing this focus on how people are related to this process and to this solution, recognizing that that is really the key to any solution being sustainable, is the buy-in from the community, is having access to that that movement expertise at the grassroots level in order to get people to accept change and to make behavior change around stormwater practices and things like that. So really wanting to highlight how that is coming across in the ways you see here listed during our project. Performance, I like when I talk about this, I talk about the bang for our buck. And it's about us deciding as a community, you know, what are we comfortable with getting for our investment that we're putting into this project, into the system, into our stormwater management system. And so looking at, as Ellen mentioned, all of those different lenses of benefit, understanding co-benefits as well, but then thinking really discreetly as a community about those levels of service and what are we going to decide is good for our city for what we're willing to pay for, really. And so that communication and conversation with community again becomes very important because that's who's paying for it. So yeah, next slide. The planet, I think that I'm really excited about how environmental justice has been playing a role here and being centered, especially around basement backups and the underreporting of that data and understanding how really that systemic issue plays into how solutions are missed at the local level and wanting to make sure that doesn't happen in this situation. And so understanding how those climate elements are playing out in every shed and at some levels those micro sheds is important, and how the investments that PWSA makes can enhance and build upon the investments around environmental justice and restoration already being made in the communities where these projects will be. And then finally, place, recognizing, you know, this is not done in a vacuum. Every, you know, dump truck that's going to bring soil and street that's going to be closed and all of that work that we're all going to do has to result in something that brings value to our lives, that's tangible, and that allows people to remain connected to this process, since we know this is a long process. It has been a long process. I like to describe it more as a relationship that we have with water in our city, and making sure that the result represents what we imagined and creates value for everyone, no matter who they are or where they might live. So I think that's a pretty good description of how we think this project touches on this work.
So tonight we're really trying to talk about place with you, so that we can think about, are there some places in Negley Run that could be really catalytic and that we could use as good illustrations of, you know, what an exemplary project that is doing something, responding to all of the planning energy of communities, and making a big difference on all these different dimensions that Ariam talked about. So when we were thinking about you know, this process, we defined some selection criteria for what we were calling catalytic sites. And those are a strong intersection of those four lenses: flooding, water quality, equity, and green space potential. Alignment with plans and advocacy community organizations, watershed task forces, all of the, you know, the players who have been moving this work forward, because the idea is, you know, we're building on the work of others and inviting collaboration and making stuff happen much faster. Third, that there's a high probability of achieving measurable gains in performance with a reasonable investment. So AKRF has been helping us look at a variety of sites and think about places that don't have giant visibility issues. There's no fatal flaw. These are doable sites. Fourth, the idea that the site conditions, these places that we've been looking at, and community goals align and allow for really exciting examples of what this kind of 4 Ps framework allows. And communicate the vision that PWSA wants to embody in all their investments and the value to citizens paying water fees. What do you get? What's the value that you get for that? And finally, that we have the potential to visualize in the same sewer sheds, watersheds, a number of potential investments that can catalyze a big shift and multiply the performance impact. So PWSA will make certain investments, but those will be part of kind of stimulus that leads to a lot of other activity or works with a lot of other activity that you are advancing. So this is just showing an overlay of flooding, water quality, and environmental justice. And you can see that areas that are purple are the places where those things are really aligning. And so this area, we're looking right at that spot of Silver Lake, which is between Larimer to the west and Homewood to the east, and is at the top of Negley Run, is one of those places that there's an alignment of these different factors. The fourth lens is just shown here. You know, the potential for trying to create a new green that is not currently green, right where that dot is in Silver Lake, and maybe to network some of the vacant lots that people have identified in the Larimer and Homewood communities as good places for green infrastructure into a larger network. So why are we talking about Silver Lake? We really we looked at a lot of places in this in Negley Run and felt that this was a good place to talk to you about, because it seems like a nexus with substantial flooding that's shared by two communities, that's adjacent to a giant high school and the YMCA. There's been a lot of work done here. It's in many community, you know, it's in community plans, it's in watershed plans, and there's been a good amount of feasibility and quantification done by engineers. And there's a mix of things that you could do tomorrow, you know, early action projects, and things that are bigger, more transformational projects that would take a little more time. Silver Lake is on that bigger transformational project end of the spectrum, but maybe work at the high school is on the early action end. We're really excited. We poured through all the plans, spent a lot of time talking with Ariam and her team, and with Heather and many other people who have been working on water in Pittsburgh for decades, and just are really excited about these being, Silver Lake being a major feature of multiple plans. Feels like there's a rich site history there, a powerful space, and it's a place where it seems like there's a real opportunity for art and design to elevate an African-American cultural landscape, which is something that's a key feature of the Homewood Plan. And because Silver Lake is something that is kind of a mind's eye, you know, project of the imagination, it seems like it's a place where you can really think about an exciting new public space that stimulates and anchors investments upstream and downstream. So these are things that just show you that we've done a little bit of homework, and we are happy to share this. But we're thinking that many people on this call have already seen, or were heavily you know, active in the participation that produced these plans. So I think, you know, this is the where we found Silver Lake as a place that the community had identified as a place of interest, and that there were goals about trying to express local culture through art and the design of landscapes that connected with the history of this community, and also opened up a really exciting future as well. Negley Run Task Force has looked at this area and done a fair amount of analysis with consultants of what it would cost and how much water you could manage. Rand took that a little further. These are just showing you that we've done a bit of homework, and there's something to share out rather than probably to talk through things like, seeding costs and so on. But and then this adjacent site to Silver Lake, looking at the Westinghouse field, and the idea of gathering a lot of water underneath the field is something that, again, has been looked at closely and estimated and incorporated into a lot of planning work that you all have done. So part of what we've been doing is trying to lift up those plans, incorporate them into this strategic planning work for PWSA, and to visualize it in a way that we hope will add something to what you have been doing. So this is looking at the buried streams. You can see they all kind of converge in this one spot. It's not a lake anymore, but when water is flowing, it does flood quite a bit and become a lake of sorts temporarily. But it's also a place where you can kind of think about this one site and the adjacent Westinghouse High School area in the context of all the other work and plans. So what PWSA has identified as plans, what the Watershed Task Force has identified, what Alcosan has identified, and maybe additional things. But the idea that we might be able to make a version of this drawing with your help that kind of shows a time series. So certain things are happening early and are very immediate, and then other things are happening in the long term. And before you know it, you start to have a kind of aggregation, clustering, layering of many interventions that begins to make a dent in some of these big goals. So this is probably not the final form of this drawing, and we would love to have anyone who's excited about marking it up and helping us understand detail to give us feedback on the drawing. But what we're trying to do is begin to show a kind of system of multiple investments. We've learned.
If only we could show the system of multiple investments.
We've learned from you all and from a little bit of research that this site has had past lives that are very interesting. It was once a lake, and this beautiful series of structures over the lake are among the sort of historical architectural assets that are valued in the Homewood Plan as one of the things that really give character to the area. After the lake was filled, it became a drive-in movie theater. So it still became, it was still a place of recreation and importance in the area, took on a new life. And I think the question is, can it return to being a place of importance between these two communities and a place of recreation? You can see in these old, amazing hand-colored maps. Here's the Silver Lake area between two neighborhoods with water in it, these buried streams draining into that basin. This is an old 1910 map showing it as a lake, and this is a current aerial photograph showing what's there now. And you can see this is the Westinghouse field, the high school's on the hill above. And then in the bowl here with the kind of steep-sided slopes with trees on them is a major storage facility and a car wash. And then the river continues, sort of these channels of flowing water continue to run down to the north. These are some pictures of the current condition. There are a number of storage facilities here, but these are what we tend to think of as, fairly movable And so though it is, most of it is private property, the estimation is that, it might be possible to offer to compensate the business owners here to relocate these buildings which break down and can be moved to other places in order to realize this as a big water feature that significantly improves the condition in the watershed and creates an amazing kind of central space of recreation. We don't know whether it can be a lake again, with permanent water in it. There's still more analysis to be done there, or whether it's a beautiful park that holds water when it's raining. But either of those features can be designed to be a kind of fantastic, amenity to neighboring communities. This just gives you a view from high on the hill of that field and of the high school, and over to the sort of right side of this drawing is where it connects with Silver Lake. So you could imagine that all these high school students have a really direct access down the slope and to that new park space. And these are some of the drawings that our team has been making just to illustrate the different sort of physical situations here, and to begin to help. We use these to sketch on top of them, to take your ideas and to think about what these might become. So that little circle in the center is, and the road is a public right of way, but then the areas around it are the storage facility. Here you can see the historic buried streams shown, as well as where the surface flow currently runs across the topography and into that basin. So the water still goes here, it wants to go here, whether the streams are buried or not, and then continue on down the Negley Run. There are landslide prone areas that can be stabilized as part of the park strategy. And so those conditions are all shown there. And this is a sort of sketch of some of the engineering strategies, where there are vacant lots that have been identified both in Larimer over here. The Larimer Orchard's a good example. And there are lots just kind of outside of this frame on the Homewood side that the community has identified in the plan as places where storm infrastructure is very appropriate. There are additional vacant lots that have other purposes slated for them. So those are shown here with the little dots but they maybe are not what the community has prioritized as those vacant lot areas for stormwater infrastructure. But they are very close by to the Silver Lake site. So the idea is with trees and other means to create some stabilization in the slopes, to put trails into those slopes that allow people to get up to the community and down into the park, and to think about what kind of a park sits in that beautiful basin. What would you do on the outside edges? Is it a performance space or a place to see movies, or a place, what kinds of recreation might the community be interested in there? And then how would it be tied into the neighborhoods? So that's really what we were hoping to talk with you about tonight, to learn more about what you'd like to see here. And so we have some questions, but I thought we might also just preview something that we've been working on. So in terms of thinking about how do we start communicating to a really broad audience some of these ideas we're developing a communications framework. One of the things that we've been exploring is the idea of creating a kind of animation that moves people from those four lenses to think about the whole citywide scale, the idea of buried streams and the potential for thickened greenways, the priority sheds, and then zooming in to Negley, and talking about the specific features here, the communities, the flooding, the places where it floods quite a lot, the idea of a kind of phased implementation, and then zooming into specific projects that could be, that you all think are catalytic, and describing those sites to people. The last stage of this could be the visualization of a community aspiration for this site. So not just the engineering strategies, but then what would you like to see there? So that's a rough draft of a kind of approach to communication that we've been working on. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about whether you think that kind of animation, once polished, could be useful to your efforts. And at this point, we will switch into engaging you on, what you'd like to see happen here, and what we should know about the past plans or current community visions for the place. And then we have a second set of questions, which are zeroing into, like, is this the right place? It seemed to be to us from looking at your work and talking with people who know those planning processes, but maybe you'll say these are not the catalytic sites to focus on in PWSA's plan. And you may have other places to suggest to us, but we wanted to kind of start out with, what would people like to see happen here, and what should we know? So your answers to those questions could be really diverse. I think, given the number of people who are here, we're definitely talking about moving into breakout groups. So
we'll go into 3 different breakout groups, which I have ready to go, but I wanted to see if there's any clarifying questions before we did that. There was a question about the high school. Maybe Ellen, you could address before we break out.
So there are fairly detailed plans done by other consultants looking at the Westinghouse field. And the main reason it's always wet and muddy is because, as you saw, all that water wants to go, it wants to flow where those buried streams are, and down those steep slopes, and through it. That's how the water moves through the area and reaches the Negley Run. So it's going to be wet there until there's a drainage and storage area that holds water below the field. So it means digging up the field and putting that underneath, and it means rerouting water around the field in order to fix that condition.
I guess my question extended is that what you're going to do?
I think what we wanted to talk with you about tonight is, what do you want to see happen there? We have, our goal is to synthesize, to show some places where investments could make a big difference, and to try to synthesize the interests of people who are experts in this area into the plan. So we don't have an independent proposal, but we want to kind of try to integrate the work that you all have been doing with the analysis of this site. So if you want to go on the record as saying, like, the lead needs to be removed and the fields need to be playable, and those are the interests, that's definitely what we want to hear.
Right, and I think the same thing goes for the other 2 questions about the site. It's a question of is there community support for this idea? Is this a big catalytic project that you would like to see happen? Because, you know, at present, there still are ownership issues there, but the more that, you know, there is support for these big ideas, the more that it could be incorporated into, you know, the illustrative kind of 4 Ps big idea project that the strategic plan is attempting to put forward. Do we want to keep on answering questions here or go into the breakout rooms? Ellen, what do you think?
I think it could be useful for us to hear from more people and just to give people a little more space to talk.
Okay, sounds good. There's a question from Pomage.
Greetings, everyone. Peace, love, and light in the Calicut. So I was wondering if since you mentioned that there's a lot of water that's being saturating the Westinghouse football field, and we've known this for years. I knew that as a child growing up too in Homewood. There is a possibility to do some water catchment that could possibly benefit. There's an urban farm in that area, not that far. It's called Bugs, and Rockaway Bay is the founder of that. And I'm sure with water issues moving forward in the future, that might be a possibility to think about some water catchment systems that those local community gardens could benefit from. There's also a little community garden across the street from Westinghouse, diagonally positioned, and the elder that runs that farm, we call him Baba Amir, affectionately known. And that was a collaboration with Community Empowerment Association. So, you know, there's always those things that I think kind of get overlooked when we talk about water and what to do with water when it's, you know, not going in the direction that it would go otherwise, you know, from what has happened over the years, and that with, you know, underground streams being dried up or redirected. So that's just something that you could reach out to Rockaway Bay and see if she's interested in something like that. Because I know water is going to be an issue for urban gardens moving forward in the future. A lot of urban gardens don't make a whole lot of, you know, fiat, but what they'll end up having to pay if, you know, the water companies kind of limit what access they have to free water, that could be something that could benefit the community as well, and also help the garden too as well. So I just wanted to mention that and kind of put that on the record because I didn't see that she was here for this meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Would you mind putting that name in the chat or letting us know how to spell it so that we can?
Oh, sure. I'll do that right now.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So just as a kind of to set the table a little bit, the strategic planning process is, it's not a fine-grained planning and design process. So what the scope of work and the resources that our team has do not go down to the level that Zina is asking for. So we're not able to, within the scope of work of this team through June, to go to, you know, what is the specific design proposal for Silver Lake? How are we addressing all of these different issues? Ours is more focused at a kind of high level strategic planning and the definition of strategies and priorities and direction for the work. And so that aspect of, you know, us or someone else planning and designing the site comes in future efforts that PWSA is moving forward. But I think what we're trying to do here is, it's hard to say that, you know, you're creating an overall strategic plan that has those 6 different areas that we talked about. but you're not talking about what that would actually mean in places. And so what we're thinking is useful is to look at places that that have a lot of potential for being exemplary sites for early action, and to try to use those to explain what kind of qualities of place can you get from a project that is managing flooding and investing in a disinvested community and creating exciting public space, et cetera. So we may not be able to get all the way to where some of the local experts would like with this effort. But we do feel that if people are willing to, talk to us about these sites, what you'd like to see there, and whether or not you believe in them as catalytic projects, or whether you think something else ought to be, that helps to advance the process, and then nominate those sites for, RFPs that allow PWSA to take the design to the next level, and the feasibility work to the next level.
I think there were some hands up. I don't know, Julie, if you want to call on folks in order, if you have.
Sure. Zina, would you like to, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm still saying that you all have the capability of doing a better design than what I've seen so far. We also have a comprehensive plan out of Homewood that you could look at to look and see where we've suggested green infrastructure. Many of us have asked that PWSA give us money to put green infrastructure to help take water out of the sewer system. And you all have not seemed to be, or PWSA has not seemed to be agreeable to this. Everybody wants to build holding tanks underneath the river, rerun water that has its own mind and runs where it wants to. So I'm going on record that we need to have a better design look than what you're showing us tonight.
Okay.
And I might sound a little silly or something, but the Silver Lake area never really, what I'm wondering is if it's connected with Homewood, which it has never really seemed connected to Homewood to me, because you get to it off of Washington Boulevard. I don't know how you would get to it exactly from Homewood, from Mertland Avenue or something. But it would really be wonderful if you could easily access that, if it became some sort of gardens, or even water gardens and lakes. And the lake, I've just been looking at a historic review of the Silver Lake and the bridge, and how that other stone bridge, the Lincoln Stone Bridge, happened to be built along with it. So I guess those are my concerns. I have to have another meeting to go to in another Zoom in a couple minutes. But I just wanted to express my interest, and thank you, Zinnia, especially you, for clearly you've been doing some work on this and are invested in it, and know a lot about what's happening and should be happening in this area. I've lived on Ray Street for 40 years. I went to Westinghouse. My mother went to Westinghouse when the lake was there. So yeah, it'd be wonderful to see that become a beautiful part of the community. I just am not sure how to connect the Homewood community with that area down there. That's kind of low down. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Great, thank you.
And thanks for what you're doing.
Just to, Sandra, we really appreciate your comments. Thanks for coming. 2 Zooms is a lot. To go back to Zinna's comment, we have looked pretty closely at the vacant lots that the Homewood plan identified for green infrastructure. They are not they're outside that the cropping of that view, but they're not far away. We'd be happy to hear from people if they prefer an emphasis on those vacant lots over, Silver Lake as the sites to feature. That's the kind of thing that we're hoping to hear tonight.
I also want to mention that in Homewood, we have an urban gardening program that's connected with Phipps Conservatory. So that, this, and I'm all about raising plants, flowers and vegetables and so on in a beautifully landscaped area, and certainly with a water theme to it. I think that'd be healthy and healing. But, that's something that perhaps PWSA and Negley run, because I've been connected with 9 Mile Run all this time. I've been getting my water barrels from them and stuff. So, but, that might be another connection is Phipps and their urban gardening program that they're running. That might be a really cool connection.
Thank you.
Question from John Stephen.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. The idea is, I just wanted to mention when we talk about the vacant lots versus the Silver Lake, I hope we don't think of it as anywhere near an either or situation. I think it really is a connective tissue. Water is really the thing that connects so much. So there's I like to talk about green infrastructure in the context of conveyance, since what we're trying to do is really convey water from the neighborhoods down to these, the assets in the ravine. And along those lines, I want to make sure we keep in mind Lincoln, Leamington, and Belmar, who are also, part of that community flows down towards Silver Lake and that ravine along Lincoln Avenue. And so it too has a vision plan and some ideas for vacant lots that can be integrated into the larger whole. So I think your presentation does a good job of painting that picture. Maybe that video you showed starts to show the connections here. So we got to sort of highlight that as well. And we got to jump on in and make this big investment, because just doing little bits and pieces of it don't get us as far as we need to go.
Thank you. I see a question from Allison in the chat. Could you please cover how this is maybe different from the Green First Plan that already identified this site? The Green First Plan is something that it's one of the many plans that we're trying to build on with this strategic work. And it is, the idea is to go beyond looking at just opportunities for green infrastructure that will improve water quality and reduce sewer overflows, to thinking about how do we also use those same investments to help reduce flooding of neighborhoods and basement backups of residents, and how do we use it to make investments, particularly in places that have been disinvested, where that investment in water can do a lot of other things for the community. And so those are the additional lenses that we talked about. And it often turns out that, there are places where the Green First Plan identified a good site for action. And this work with the additional lenses says, yes, with the additional lenses, this is still a really good site, which is part of the reason why we have zeroed in on this location. There are other places that are really great locations to think about green infrastructure. that don't do as much about flooding, don't do as much for an environmental justice neighborhood. And so they are less of a priority in this new, way of looking at things in terms of what are the multiple benefits that you can create. If there are others on the team who want to jump in to answer questions too, feel free to do that either by typing in the chat or jumping in.
Ellen, I thought it might be useful to go back to one of the slides just a little bit before this that did look at that kind of system-wide scale, just because we've had a few questions about how the Silver Lake project fits into a lot of the other work that's been done over the years. And I think that could reinforce maybe slide, it could be this one or slide 37. Yeah, I think slide 37 would be helpful because it talks about, it shows how we are looking at Silver Lake as kind of the fulcrum of this intersection of different neighborhoods, and it also takes into account a lot of the PWSA planned or active projects or things that are kind of taking from some of these other plans that have been mentioned tonight. So it's not an either or, as Ellen was saying, but it is more of a kind of looking around at what's been happening over the past several years and trying to link these all together so that, we can think about this entire area that's in this slide as the catalytic site, not just the lake itself or not just the vacant lots ideally. So that that's kind of why we're putting the strategic plan hat on is so it's not just about these kind of engineering solutions throughout, but it's looking at these as one area that can all be lifted up together. So I know there were a few comments in the chat that had to do with this general question. So hopefully this is helpful in explaining how the team has been thinking of this to date. And I'm not sure if anyone else from the team wants to add to that. So that, Claudia, you had a question about that. So hopefully, and Zina as well, that we're not looking at these sites in isolation, but as part of a larger whole.
I'm looking, is the next question working with communities outside of Pittsburgh, Penn Hills, that inter-municipal relationship? Is that
There is that question, but I don't know, Jordan, you had to put what
I'm so sorry.
a combined comment and question that might be good for the group to hear.
Sure, I'll try to restate it. Yeah, I basically wanted to just point back to the work that we did a couple of years ago, and just thinking definitely taking this approach of thinking about it like a system, but starting from the bottom up, which is very much consistent with the visioning plan that the task force initially pulled together, and just noting that in terms of catalytic sites, like there's public land in the lower portion of Washington Boulevard and going up Little Negley Run, as well as a lot of work in Larimer that would directly connect there, as you've got on the map here. And it seems like it might be more of that early win to do the lower portion first. And that was kind of our recommendation, was to really focus on that as the early priority, and then look at Silver Lake as an opportunity, but one that you really need to resolve a lot of, or at least some significant barriers like site ownership first. So again, to me, we certainly focused a lot on it in our research and report, and think it's a great opportunity and one that could really it could be a potential to connect to all the neighborhoods above and provide that connectivity to Homewood. But that there's so much that could be done already with public land going up the Lower Washington Boulevard corridor and up Little Negley Run.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing that. And then Ariam, if you wanted to jump into the other question.
Penn Hill's question.
Mhm.
I think that would have to be a part of it, and then I think the joint task force communications framework that we talked about putting together is based on having that ongoing relationship and communication and activity within task force, such as the Negley Run Task Force, and where conversations and ongoing conversations and connections with other municipalities and people there can be fostered and maintained. And so I think that's absolutely something that would have to happen, and building out that framework of how you're going to sustain those communications, record them, and then follow up with action. Really advocating for the task force model and having that become a centralized part of the way that stormwater is managed strategically at PWSA, and hoping to show that through the ambassador program as some of that work starts to come back. Ellen, forgive me, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that intermunicipal work, as far as coordination amongst a variety of different municipalities, may be more advanced in the other project area. And so maybe even doing some exchange learning and not recreating the wheel, but using some intellectual capital there to understand how to best engage the external municipalities and around this area. And in that case, really between neighborhoods, because so many people mentioned here, there are lots of very specific neighborhoods with very specific needs and identities as well. And so how are those represented on an ongoing basis and negotiated over time through project execution? So again, the task force model, I think, is really key to underpinning all of that.
Thanks, Ariam. And thanks for the additional comments in the chat that are supporting some of the other ideas that have been stated. Is there a question from Sandra Glass?
Hi, yes, I do have a question. My name is Sandra Glass, and I'm from the Lincoln Leamington Collaborative. On this last map that you show, I'm a little confused by the boundaries here. It almost looks like Lincoln Leamington Belmar is like almost like not a part of the city. You're showing Chadwood Park and Paulson Park sort of in the Homewood boundaries when it's in Lincoln Leamington. So I'm a little confused by this map. And as John Stevens said earlier, Silver Lake, you know, the Lincoln Bridge, the viaduct and all that is a part of the Lincoln Leamington neighborhood. And we have just finished our vision plan. And so we are planning to do some beautifying things around the viaduct and around the bridge. So we very much should be, it's not just Homewood, Lincoln Leamington Belmar should also very much be a part of this conversation and in these descriptions of this area and a part of what's going on down there. But I'm real confused about those boundaries though.
From a cartography standpoint, that is an amazing and really great catch. That just looks like a projection issue where the label that got output by the system just was moved. But you can see the outline of Lincoln Leamington Belmar shaded in both on this side of the river and north of Allegheny. where you would see that other piece. So you're right. It should really be about an inch or two to the left. You're correct. That area, Paulson Park, Tyler Park, all of that is where Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar is.
Yes.
So really great catch.
Sorry about that error. These are definitely, drawings in progress, animations in progress, and your notes and corrections we'll put right in. Sandra, did you want to say anything about sites that you think are catalytic and important for early stage investment?
Not at this point. We haven't done a whole lot to talk about things like that. And we have a green team who has really been really active in this, that away. I'm just coming along, just getting to be a part of it. They've been active in it, and so nothing would be done without, they would be at the head of that. So we need to look at it a little further.
Great.
But thank you, I appreciate it.
Which question is next there? I'm starting to lose track a little bit, Julie.
I'm responding to Mike's question about upstream PGH. That I believe that we reviewed that, but I'll make a note to double check, because you're talking about East Homewood and eastern part of Homewood and East Hills, correct, Mike?
Yeah, we've been working in that area. We called it for several years now the Rosedale Runoff Reduction Project, and it looks like one of the green infrastructure sites that we've already built is located in that shaded green area to the furthest east underneath the label East Hills. So we've been building distributed green infrastructure that was on a school campus, and then we've built others on vacant lots. And so just curious if that was pulled into this research as a model or considered as a strategic site area.
I'm wondering what the overlay of the other lens is, if we might go back to the overlay and see what it tells us about that project area, because that might give us a little bit of insight into exactly what you're asking, Mike.
Yeah, because it looked like on that map with the purple thematics that it was one of the hotter spots.
That would have been the, go ahead.
It definitely is. It's has less flooding, I think, in the mapping. So it's so it's purple as an environmental justice area, and being at the top of the watershed, it's, based on this mapping work, seems to have less flooding. So I think we were considering working downstream might be a place where you would get an intersection of flooding, water quality, and environmental justice. But, it's super useful to us if you either voice your interest in looking at that site as a potential, priority or catalytic site, and or put those things in the chat, because that puts it on our team's agenda.
Thank
Can
you.
you make that map a little bigger? Thanks.
And I think that also represents kind of what can be that disconnect between lived experience and like the mapping, because Mike, we know what the bottom of Rosedale looks like, and so like the majority is up in the watershed, but like it's still, that intersection is like what's the issue for folks when it does rain. And so while it's finding that balance between that one point of data, or what's the word, that instance of experience versus the overlays of like and the kind of larger picture. I feel like we're really trying to strike that balance here when it tries to identify those catalytic projects, and maybe there's room, like what does catalytic 2 look like? Like, can we start to understand the difference between those, and or in the sense of importance, between lived experience versus also like achieving those big goals.
Since we're at 7:15, if people want us to do homework on particular sites of that you think are better early action or priority, projects that you think would have the biggest effect in terms of, performance, place, planet, etc., put those in the chat if you don't feel you have a chance to speak in these last minutes, just so that'll be, in our list of homework to do. Any other comments you want to give us? We'd be happy to take.
There's a few hands up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we don't get them all, people have time to.
Got you.
So go for it. You can moderate for us, Arian.
No, okay. Tom, I think I saw yours up for a while. How's it going? Haven't seen you in a bit.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to make a historical comment. I've been working for like 12 years with the Our Water campaign, we tried to get Alcosan to consider things like this when they were, instead of or in conjunction with doing the tunnels. And they were never, ever willing to consider all of these other things like stormwater and community benefits and environmental justice. So I just want to say that I think this is really great. And I also want to say that I'm not saying that we shouldn't push PWSA as hard as we can. And I just think that it's been really great that people have been involved in this. And it's been, PWSA is handing us a really big opportunity here. And I think we should all keep being a part of this process because they're taking a very different approach than another organization that I won't mention. Thank you.
Amaj, do you have your hand still up?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll lower it now. So I just wanted to add to the comment that was made about Lincoln Leamington and the community. There hasn't been much discussion, so I thought this was just really focusing on Homewood. Since we are going to mention Lincoln Leamington, two things that we've addressed in our surveys and talking to people in the community, Sister Dana Fowler and Sister Joanne Tibbet, we've found that there is issues with water runoff from Mount Carmel Road coming down Lincoln Avenue that culminates at the bottom there. A lot of the sewers get backed up, which of course then basements get backed up. Another thing that we need to put on the record today too is we're in the middle of the watershed over here in Nagley Run, and we've been doing a lot of work working with John and the Nagley Run Watershed Task Force and doing a lot of walks throughout the community and identifying trails that can be beneficial in this green infrastructure plan too as well. We don't want to forget about trails. And with that being said, the Silver Lake area itself, as the previous, I think it was Ms. Zenna said, there can be beneficial things looked at. How can we can connect these communities, Homewood, Lincoln, Larmer, through trails. There are a lot of back areas that can be turned into purposeful trails, and then certain type of species can be planted in those spaces that actually work with absorbing water and stopping a lot of the rainwater runoff and that kind of thing. Final point, Chadwick Park has a football field up there. Similar situation to Westinghouse Park. I'm sure there were some streams that were dried up, channels blocked, whatever, because there was water behind the field there that's no longer there. It's just like a hollow now. And so that field becomes saturated and becomes very marshy too. And it's in the middle of the watershed. So that water that doesn't get saturated in there, that does begin to run off down this back street that no longer is available or accessible to use, but is still there. This water goes down to Grotto, and then it begins to, filter itself down to Lincoln and then Leamington. And then ultimately some of the stream water does make it down to Washington Boulevard and back in that area. So I just want to make sure that when we're talking about, these spaces and places, that those spaces don't get overlooked of the importance and the significance of them. And a lot of green infrastructure can be done in that area to create water catchment systems. We have a food forestry that we're creating up there. So we could benefit from some water catchment systems too through PWSA's assistance. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
That's awesome. I saw a lot of people nodding when you made reference to kind of that co-benefit of creating another multimodal method to transverse these communities and get between communities, especially for communities and neighborhoods that may have been disconnected from each other in past infrastructure investments. And what a great time to make arguments about investments in multimodal transportation, such as when this infrastructure bill came down from the United States Congress, and how can we leverage opportunities like that to get dollars into the neighborhoods. I think that's just a really great idea and a great point in a way we should be thinking about these investments. And so that's a really great, I'm 100% on board with that.
Thank you. Don't forget the Negro Opera House too. Right behind there, there's a lot of opportunity to do some green infrastructure. She's working on grants and things like that, and the community is giving her all kind of support. So I would suggest to reach out to that sister too as well.
Great point. It overlays. You bring up another piece of not only legacy and tourism, but economic development and access to having those cultural assets a part of your everyday life. That's something that creates value of place and actually creates very real property value as well. And so how are you using these infrastructure investments to connect those? I think is a really great way to look at what's best to spend money on doing projects and what can best serve the community. Joanne, I see your hand up as well.
Yes, in addition to Chadwick Park and Paulson Field, there is a park that was a field actually called Navarro Field that is on the hills, the slopes that lead down to Washington Boulevard. So there are other areas that haven't been identified that could be potential areas for absorbing water and planting GSI. So I just wanted to mention that.
You've given us a lot to think about tonight. I think this is really helpful. It's sounding, we'll have to talk as a team and talk with PWSA, but it is sounding like people are more interested in thinking about kinds of investment and having those be more distributed instead of one big emphasis, thinking about strategies and multiple locations in multiple neighborhoods, and those many small important projects tied to, you know, cultural values and neighborhood, you know, particulars is maybe more what people would like to see us lift up out of the planning work that you've done. If that sounds like it matches your opinion, feel free to signal that. If you disagree, that's useful for us to know too. But that, I think that's feels like what I'm hearing.
You can also use the thumbs up and thumbs down emojis, or yes or no will also suffice. I mean, it is after hours, whatever you choose.
There you go. It looks like there's a few thumbs up, but there's also a question from Paul. Paul, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, hi, Paul Mortichuk from URA. Just, I guess, elaborate a little bit on your thought there as you look at more of a, you know, kind of scattered sites approach, and using like multiple resources. You know, this is a very large watershed, and there's a lot of acute stormwater problems throughout the watershed, and probably just making one large project in the lower area is that helping? I mean, that helps to reduce the, you know, the inflow, you know, releases to the river and holding back water from treatment, but that doesn't really address the issues that people are having on a local level on, you know, on their block, in their basements, you know, up in the watershed. So I guess keep that in mind as we look to those multiple goals that we're trying to achieve throughout this, to, you know, how does that distribution of focus work and solve, you know, the most problems or balance the solution of problems. That's my thoughts.
It's almost as if you're flipping the priority. So, you know, all of these watersheds and the routes the water takes still are all kind of going towards where Silver Lake is. But instead, as Ellen said, starting to make those interventions further out into the communities and move towards maybe in the future a larger holistic investment that takes advantage of all that previous works and kind of like capstones it. It's almost kind of reversing that viewpoint. So that's a really, really interesting concept and way to think about it.
Yeah, you know, I love the idea of the lake and, you know, the park and, you know, that kind of a resource. You know, and that's, you know, that's some of the gems that we have in our city, you know, is our parks and some of the larger areas and the water feature areas that we have. But you know, I guess it's that we just have to look at how to balance, you know, the goals we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Paul. There's a question from Viv Schaefer.
Hi, thanks. I am just joining the conversation. I'm coming from a board meeting, so I missed most of the meeting. And so I apologize if I'm asking you to recap something that you've already presented, but I see Westinghouse Park on the map, and I'm just curious as to, I know that at one point Alcosan had identified Westinghouse Park as a prime location for doing some stormwater mitigation. And I'm just wondering if you can fill me in on what's been the discussion this evening around Westinghouse Park.
If maybe we'll stay on at the end of the meeting to catch you up, just because we're very close to the end of this meeting.
Sure.
And answer that question.
Sure, great, thank you.
Sure. The one thing I would love to, before we switch into our end game here, is I feel like now we have two ideas that have been put on the table. One is, you know, you get a bigger bang for buck closer downstream, where there could be a lot of impact on flooding. And then the second idea is a more distributed set of investments in multiple neighborhoods, vacant lots, important cultural areas. That's kind of, you know, I feel like those two ideas were suggested tonight. If anyone wants to weigh in on one, which is lower in the run versus the more distributed multi-site approach, we'll call 2, just by writing 1 or 2. That's also another quick way for us to get a little poll here at the end.
So you want folks to put that in the chat, Ellen?
Yeah, just if, we know who you are and what you said earlier, but it might be helpful for us to hear just to, or 1 + 2.
I do see, and I actually think 1 + 2 is great. Phasing, there's now and then there's later, but water is here to stay, and hopefully so are we. So there's this idea that if we're always working towards something, good ideas don't need to go away. We can work towards them. So it's more about that prioritization, and I love that. As a city planner, phasing is my favorite word.
Yep.
Ariam, do you want to tell us what's next with the ambassadors and what's going to happen?
Becca, are you still here? Becca, I don't want to lie. Please. I'd like to, this is our Grounded's project manager of land use policy, Becca Simon, who's been our fearless leader of our ambassador programs. Go ahead, Becca.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm off camera. I'm feeling a little off today, but I'm excited to announce cohort 1. They all have their surveys out and ready. They're focusing in the priority sewer sheds, highlighting the Green First plan. We actually have, I think, 2 of the Negley Run ambassadors who are on this call, Joanne and Shaman Pomai as well, who are doing work directly in Negley Run. Thanks, Pomai. So their surveys are on our website. I will plug that link in. And then we have also started cohort 2 officially last week, which is mainly focusing in the areas highlighted by the Penn Praxis team mapping, specifically looking at Sawmill Run, Homewood, Sheridan, Woods Run, Hazelwood. So we have 8 people in that cohort, and we're looking more into this design side, understanding the site selection process and helping engage residents on this connection to Silver Lake and Sawmill Run areas as well. So, and thank you, Ariam, for plugging those in. But if you have any other questions about the ambassador program, feel free to email me at becca@groundedpgh.org. But we're hoping to have some more information on what we've learned from the ambassadors in the next couple months. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Becca. Go back to bed, please. But yeah, Shaman, Pomaj, and Joanne, if y'all want to make any notes on your experience, I'd welcome that as well.
We wanted to create a little space here for Tony to jump in as well.
Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, did you want me to go now or later?
That's great.
That's good.
Okay, yeah, part of the reason that I kind of wanted to jump in is to give people a little bit of a background and maybe put a lot of this in context. I think Jordan and Paul and a few other people and John Stephen actually alluded to it. PWSA's approach is really not just the green infrastructure that was done previously. It was focused heavily on CSO control. The green infrastructure we're talking about that Ellen kind of touched on now is a combination of us handling stormwater flooding as well as water quality based things that we have to address. So from a stormwater flooding standpoint, we need to understand the level of service that PWSA can afford to offer as a level of service, not just for this region, but for the entire city of Pittsburgh. And that level of service is something that we're working through this project to help us get kind of a guidelines how we're going to establish it. So whatever green infrastructure we put together needs to help us not only manage the water on site, but conveying it to different locations and being able to handle the level of service that we come up with. So what we're talking about today is there's a lot of conceptual things, and I like how people are talking about different phases. This is probably just the first phase from a planning standpoint that gives you, that's why we're calling it a strategic plan. So the intention is when PWSA is done, we're going to have what is essentially a much more detailed stormwater plan that will go to each one of these sites within the city and lay out what the project envision for those sites should be and how those projects help us address the selected level of service for storm. That we're talking about pretty expensive programs that will need to be phased over time. The other side of this, while we're talking about the stormwater side, we're also going to be talking to EPA right now that is going to cost them at least $2 billion to address. PWSA will do this, will have the same thing. And this, so those are the kinds of things that we're working on. And I just wanted to make sure that people have a context for the information that we're receiving, that we're talking about tonight. And I really thank you for the time that you've taken to at least help us walk through some of these basic things up front. And definitely saying that this is really going to be a process over time, as most of you already know. The planning needs to be completed, and as we're completing planning, projects then start rolling out in terms of places where they could actually be accomplished. So that's just a quick brush overview of where things stand. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tony. Well, thank you all so much for your time and for all of your comments tonight. I think hopefully we were able to address most of them and have an actually very productive conversation about what some of the priorities are in the area. So really, really valuable input. Thank you all so much. And thank you to John Stephen for helping to push out word about the meeting. And we look forward to staying in touch with all of you as we go through the next phases of the project. And we've collected all of your names, and so we'll be in touch so that you can stay involved. Anything else to add from PWSA or the team?
Thanks a lot. We learned a lot tonight. We appreciate it.
Do we have a moment for you to fill me in briefly on anything that was said about Westinghouse Park?
We'll stay on. Yeah.
Absolutely. But everyone else is free to go. And thank you all so much.